All right, welcome to World War II lecture part 2. We're going to get into the details of the German conquests of the war and tactics of the war and so forth in today's lecture. We left off with Germany invading Poland on September 1st, 1939, and they used a war as new warfare to defeat me. Poland was able to be defeated in less than a month by means of this new blitzkrieg tactic. And so the partition because remember, they had promised to split Poland with the USSR, and that occurred only when the USSR got their act together and attacked from the east. Stalin didn't realize how quickly Hitler was going to attack, and so he got his act together and was like, oh, I better invade the other side if I want my piece of the pie. After that, Stalin is then going to invade Finland, and if you know anything about the battle in Finland, the Finnish fighters were able to defend their country very loyally. They actually attacked the Russian soldiers on skis, and they tried their best to defend their country, but Stalin just had way too many men. And they also fought in the winter, so it was very, very cold. So very noble fighting there on the part of the Finnish soldiers. Move into 1940, Hitler is then going to, after taking over Poland in April, after reestablishing his troops, and you notice here that France and Britain have done absolutely nothing, but he then invades Denmark and also Norway, and then he goes into the Netherlands, Belgium, and Luxembourg, and all of these in just 2 short months fall very quickly to Germany. And you can see there the German troops with their tanks moving into those countries. Fast forward to France. As he attacked France, it's very interesting the strategy of how this took place, because France was just sitting behind what was called the Maginot Line, thinking that they would attack a certain way. I'll show you on the next slide. But instead, Germany actually came in through the Ardennes forest in the south, which the French did not expect at all. And they were able to surround Paris, and it fell in less than 6 weeks. And so you can see here from the map that they went through, the French thought that the Schlieffen plan was going to happen again, and they were just going to come through Belgium, which they did to kind of like a decoy, when in fact the majority of the German troops came in from the south. See where it says the Ardennes forest, and were able to surround Paris completely. Famous photograph of Hitler in Paris once it fell. And so what's going to happen to France? Well, Germany allowed them to set up their own government in the south, which was known as Vichy France. He didn't really want to waste a lot of time subduing the entire country because it was so large. So this puppet government was created under the control of Henri Pétain, Now, Henri Pétain was actually the French general in World War I. Later on, he was executed for treason by the French government by allowing this to happen. Eventually, Vichy France is going to be completely taken over by Germany, called Operation Torch, in late 1942. But in the see on the map here, the occupied zone was occupied by the Germans, and the purple, that represents Vichy France. So General Charles de Gaulle was actually the French general of the general of the French armies, and he was able to flee to Britain during the attack on France, where he went on the radio and did his best to call all French citizens to band together in what he called the Free French, or Free France, and basically trying to see who could flee to Britain so that they would be able to eventually take their country back. So fast forward to the beginning of 1940, this is when Japan decided to join allies with Mussolini and Hitler. This is known as the Tripartite Pact, and basically it was for mutual defense and military support. And you can see the representatives here signing that pact. Okay, next we're going to talk about the Battle of Britain. And so this was the next step in Hitler's conquest. He knew next up was going to be him taking over England. This was going to be an incredibly critical battle of the war, and we're going to talk about why in just a moment. But as you can see, it took place from July all the way through October of 1940. Now, keep in mind that before Hitler attacked, he in fact did offer Britain peace. He said, if Britain accepts the fact that Germany is in control of Western Europe, we will not attack. But please keep in mind, Hitler had already gone back on his word in prior conversations with Britain. And so at this point, Winston Churchill is the new prime minister, because Chamberlain retired, or was asked to leave, actually. And of course, Winston Churchill is going to flatly refuse. He was not in any mood for making any type of negotiations or appeasement with Hitler, because he knew he was is known for his famous quote here. He said, "We shall fight on the beaches, we shall fight on the landing grounds, we shall fight in the fields and in the streets, we shall fight in the hills, we shall never surrender." And in fact, this becomes known as Britain's finest hour, because they in fact did not surrender. And so the reason this is a critical battle is because this is the first time that starting in August, the Luftwaffe was led by Hitler's right-hand man, Hermann Göring, and they were ordered to destroy the RAF, or the Royal Air Force. But Britain had a new secret weapon, not really a weapon, but a new form of technology, and that was radar. And so this was relatively new in terms of technology, and so they were able to detect Germany's air attacks. Another thing not mentioned here, kind of gives you an idea of the Battle of Britain and all the different areas that were bombed. And what people do is they would have these basically sirens that would alert when the next attack was coming by. And so the people would actually have to hide in the subways for months. Many of them slept in the subways because, as you can see, I mean, the city was completely destroyed. And so that's why the subways in England are called the Underground, because people would have to ground. And so here is a picture of St. Paul's Cathedral. And this, unfortunately, was not destroyed in the bombing. It had some damage, but not destroyed. Winston Churchill standing here with George VI, King George. And they were successful in not surrendering. And so here is a famous quote: "Never was so much owed by so many to so few." As a result of the Battle of Britain, Hitler was forced to call off the invasion in September. They lost 2,433 planes, and the RAF only lost 900, which is astounding when you think about it. The Blitz is going to continue into Mexico. So fast forward now to what is known as Operation Barbarossa, and this is the German invasion of the Soviet Union. Hitler had decided that it was time to follow through with his plans. A political cartoon basically showing Hitler stabbing him in the back. This map shows you their three-front attack, or Operation Barbarossa. There was a group that was going to go in the north and take over the city of Leningrad, a group in the middle that was going to head straight to Moscow, and then a group taking over the oil fields of the southern part of Russia as well. Ultimately, that was their goal, was to try to get as much oil as possible so that Hitler could continue fighting this war, because he was running low on supplies. And so this is another map that shows you the German invasion of Russia. First of all, starting in the Eastern Europe, but the western part of Russia, including Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, and so forth. So fast forward through the winter, the Germans were so close to taking Moscow. They had completely laid siege to Leningrad, and so this had now taken place. So you can see here different advances that took place in the Eastern Front from June 22nd to December 5th in 1941. So in the meanwhile, there was something happening in the United States. Stated that once the Axis powers were defeated, there's not going to be any territorial changes contrary to the wishes of its inhabitants. So basically, the people of the countries that have been taken over by Hitler will be able to decide their own fate. This is known as something called self-determination. And they wanted to create a permanent system of general security. In other words, fix the League of Nations and make something better. This would later become known as the United Nations. Stalin, when he heard about this, even though he didn't meet with Roosevelt and Churchill, he did endorse this agreement and wanted to be part of it and wanted to make sure that was true. Now, it's interesting that I say that because we know once we get into the Cold War, Stalin is not going to necessarily agree with that. So what about the United States? They're not necessarily really involved at this point. They're still dealing with isolationism, and they're going to remain militarily neutral, of course, until the attacking of Pearl Harbor in 1941, and we'll get into that a little bit later. And that's because of what are known as the Neutrality Acts that were signed in the United States that prevented Roosevelt from drawing the U.S. into World War II any earlier. But they were kind of involved in the war before the attacking of Pearl Harbor, and that is because of what is called the Lend-Lease Act, where they were able to give large amounts of money and also military supplies to try to ultimately helping the Allies. And so you can see here from this chart, this tells you exactly how much they actually gave in those Lend-Lease Acts. Look at that as well. And you can see where most of the aid was going. So officially, though, we know that all the wars that were started in 1941 and Barbara and John Barbara is that they were in the continent of Asia. They were an island over the Pacific, but knew they couldn't continue with these picture here. This is when Roosevelt signs the declaration of war against Japan, and even at this point, Hirohito, who was the emperor, he basically made the comment, "We have awoken a sleeping giant," and that is definitely an understatement. As a result, because of the Axis alliance that was signed earlier, Hitler declared war on the United States on December 11th. Again, a very fatal blunder on the part of Hitler, probably not his wisest decision. And so as a result, instead of focusing on Japan at first, the United States decided to join forces with Britain and focus their entire attention on defeating Germany first. And so the Grand Alliance was formed in 1942 between Britain, Soviet Union, and the United States, as well as about 36 other countries that now are going to put all of their forces in trying to defeat Hitler. And so you can see that here on this chart, where you have the Axis powers on one side and then the Allied powers on the other. And as you can see, both sides started to grow as the war progressed. And so tomorrow in class, we'll talk about exactly how the tide of the war completely turned, especially with the Battle of Stalingrad in Russia, the Battle of the Bulge, D-Day, how Italy was involved, and then eventually how the war in Europe ended. Have a good night.